From using bad armor mods to suboptimal damage strategies, there are a bunch of ways you might still be playing Destiny 2 wrong. Today we're going through a bunch of the mistakes that players are making so that you can have more fun in Destiny and become a better and more optimized player. First off, we have not matching your damage type when fighting against subjugators. Subjugators are really powerful because they unleash crazy stasis or strand abilities that can freeze or suspend you. However, the abilities make it easy to tell if they are stasis or strand, and then if you hit them with their own damage type, they take massively increased damage, so hit the like button if you didn't know this. If you're ever trying to get somewhere in a hurry and you really want to get there fast, you're not quite being optimal if you simply hold down your vehicle's boost button. Especially when you're on a skimmer vehicle, you will actually go about 30% faster by spamming the boost button repeatedly. Skimmers have no cooldown for doing this, so you can basically just go extra fast for free by boosting multiple times. The Sparrow energy system was also reworked, so the Sparrow boost spam now provides significantly more of an advantage than it did in the past. It's crazy that we've been encountering taken enemies for like the past 9 years or something, but many players still don't know about the subtle ways these enemies respond to player behavior. It's very common to make the mistake of aiming down sights at the taken scions, and this actually causes them to multiply and spawn in even more scions. If you simply hipfire instead, they will be far less likely to multiply, and therefore they will be far easier to defeat. A similar situation also applies to Taken Thrall, because they teleport all over like this when you're aiming, but when firing from the hip, they become much more calm and easy to deal with. Something you might potentially do wrong in the future is spend a lot of money on super expensive earbuds, when instead you could get the same sound quality for half the price with Raycon earbuds, the sponsor of today's video. The new and improved everyday earbuds offer everything you could want, with features like active noise cancelling, awareness mode, weatherproofing, multi-point connectivity, and an overall ergonomic design that fits into the widest possible range of ear types. The previous model of the everyday earbuds sold over 3 million units, so it's safe to say that this is an extremely popular fan-favorite design. They can be used for basically anything, whether you're watching YouTube videos or listening to some music or a podcast while you go on a walk, and these are some of the ways that I like to use the earbuds myself. I normally have 3 main issues with earbuds. They fall out, they're uncomfortable, and you can't hear anything around you. Luckily though, with Raycon, none of these factors are a problem, and thanks to the awareness mode, you can even choose if and when you want to hear your surroundings. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/shadowdestiny to get 15% off your Raycon purchase and free shipping. Many of us might make the assumption that it's a good idea to stand in Well of Radiance for dealing bonus damage, but depending on the situation, it can actually reduce your damage. Well of Radiance will give you a 25% buff, but for whatever reason, this actually does not apply to Golden Gun. Therefore, it is actually best to stand outside of the Well of Radiance instead and use the Radiant buff to get your 25% bonus. If you do happen to go back inside the well, it will actually remove that Radiant buff, and therefore nerf your damage by a massive 25%. If you're in a dark area, your ghost will often help you out by lighting up objects in front of you, but sometimes, for whatever reason, he just decides to not do this. When he isn't lighting your way, there are certain dark areas where it can be very hard to see and navigate. Instead of getting lost though, you could manually pull out your ghost, but you could also throw a grenade, and funny enough, the flashlight emote will also work to help light up the area. Based on outdated research and a bunch of misconceptions in the community, most players still believe that it's a good idea to make your recoil direction stat end with the number 5. That was kind of true in the past, but nowadays all new weapons come with deterministic recoil, meaning that the pattern of the recoil will be exactly the same every single time. So instead of simply making your recoil number end with a 5, what you actually want to do is use it to make the pattern more vertical. So for example, this pattern just always goes to the left like this, so I should use a recoil direction stat that goes to the opposite direction in order to help compensate. As you can see here, the weapon is now much more vertical overall, and this makes it much easier to control. If you're not visiting this special kiosk and claiming all of this loot every episode, you are really missing out. Among other things, there is a grouping of loot called Rahul's Secret Stash that will appear right here once every 4 months, and this will give you some incredible rewards like Ascendant Shards, exotic ciphers, upgrade modules, Ascendant alloys, and awesome cosmetics. This comes as a bonus for annual pass holders who bought the $100 version of the latest Destiny expansion. Unfortunately, these rewards and currencies will expire at the end of every episode and disappear forever. So if you're not claiming them, you're basically just robbing yourself of a bunch of free loot. When you're going into more difficult content, it's definitely a mistake to disregard and not take advantage of the overcharge and surge modifiers that are present right here when you select the activity. These bonuses do not stack together, but still, a 25% free damage boost for simply using a certain type of loadout is an absolutely huge boost that you really should not be missing out on. A lesser known fact is that certain overloads are also present within your artifact. So for example, if you have Overload Sword, it says that swords are always overcharged when the modifier is active. Therefore, if an activity has any type of overcharge and then you also equip your Overload Sword right here, it will give you 25% bonus damage with your sword at all times, which is huge. All of the champion mods also function as overcharge mods too, so everything out of the left column of your artifact will work in exactly the same way. Since we are kind of on this topic already, it's important to note that surges also apply a hidden bonus that buffs your kinetic damage, but most players actually do not know that this is a thing. It isn't mentioned anywhere in the description here, so this often flies under the radar and goes completely unnoticed. Essentially how it works is if the element of your super is matching the element of the surge, all of your kinetic weapons will also get a large 25% buff. This will easily make or break your performance, especially if you're relying on something that is kinetic for your boss damage, so be sure that you either use the correct subclass or simply apply a matching super element within your prismatic loadout. The controller cursor is pretty slow in Destiny, and it does take a couple seconds to move it all the way across your screen and navigate large destinations like the Pale Heart. This can make menu navigation rather cumbersome if you only use the cursor, but thankfully you can also use the bumpers and the D-pad in order to move around the menus much more rapidly like this. Another thing that 82.5% of you are doing wrong is not being subscribed. For real though, I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing. I know the Onslaught activity isn't as popular as it once was, but I still see many players making the mistake of drawing the big Tormentor bosses over to their ADU. The Tormentors will exclusively chase after players, so try not to stand near the ADU because this is a great way to get wiped out and sent right back to orbit. Divinity is a popular and sometimes controversial exotic from the Garden of Salvation raid. Some players don't like how mandatory it feels in many raid encounters as it gives a 15% debuff in addition to creating a large crit spot on the boss. When using this exotic though, some people simply hold down the fire button to continuously fire it, but the problem is this uses up the special ammo very quickly. Since the bubble stays up for 1.5 seconds, you can actually just tap the trigger every so often and the bubble will still never go away. This helps to preserve ammo and minimize how often you need to reload and cause the bubble to drop off. If you just turn in your bounties and challenges without first optimizing your mods, you're really missing out on a lot of free XP gains. The first and most obvious optimization you can do is simply equip the Blinding Light Ghost mod, which will give you a nice 12% buff to your XP. It's not like it's going to double your XP or something, but overall it will definitely help you out and make you unlock those essential season pass levels and artifact perks. This will actually snowball over time as well, because the Season Pass will provide you with additional XP boosts as you get to the higher levels, so the faster you level it up, the faster you will gain experience in the future. The next thing you can do is also join another player who is hopefully a high level, because their Season Pass XP boost will also give you a bonus of up to 8%. If you're looking for people to join up on or just play with in general, feel free to join my Discord and our community would be happy to help. Some of us make a habit of visiting Xur every weekend, but if you don't, then now is definitely the time to start. Xur has a system called Strange Favor, where after spending 47 Strange Coins, he gives you access to a buff that gives you a large bonus to your Strange Coin drops for the next 11 days. This buff can also stack, so it is quite important to always visit Xur to get the buff so that you can optimize your Strange Coin farming, save up as many as possible, and then spend them to get Xur's loot and increase your reputation with Xur. From catalysts to exotics to even red border drops, Xur has a lot of value here, so it's definitely worth your time to go get the buff. Another thing I should mention is that you should probably be spending your Strange Coins if you have a lot of them. It seems that they cap out at 99, so if you're getting close to that number, it's probably a good idea to spend them to avoid wasting future drops. If you're using reserve mods on your armor and you just leave them on during your gameplay, you are kind of doing it wrong. Reserve mods let you hold a larger amount of total ammo, and this is great, but you should really be using resist mods instead. This is because you can actually get the benefit of the reserve mods without actually using them during combat. If you simply equip your reserve mods, rally to the flag, and then switch over to your other mods, you will still be able to keep all of that extra ammo from the reserve mods even though they are no longer equipped. This way, you basically get the best of both worlds because you'll be getting the extra ammo and simultaneously the big damage reduction from the resist mods that you're now using. I recommend keeping one extremely bad chest piece that just always has 3 reserve mods on it, and that way it will be extremely fast and easy to just swap over to it for rallying and then swap back to your main chest piece like this. If you notice that you're getting really close to a vendor reset for one of the playlist activities, it is probably best to not go over there and turn in a bunch of engrams. The reason for this is that after you reset the vendors, all of their loot will drop with extra perks from the engrams. Especially if you're able to get extra perks in both of the columns, this is a huge advantage. It will dramatically shorten the amount of rolls you need to get before you find the perk combination that you're looking for. Although there can be an exception, you're probably making a mistake if you're not equipping 3 surge mods on your boots during boss damage phases. When you have armor charge, you can stack up to 3 of these mods to gain 22% bonus damage. If all of your fireteam members are using this during a raid, for example, it's like adding a whole other member to your fireteam and then some. This can easily be the deciding factor between defeating the boss and having to do another rotation. If you don't want to give up some of your other mods, you can do what some players do and have a second pair of boots to swap to just as the damage phase is starting. This is very similar to the reserve mod thing that we discussed earlier, because you will get the best of both worlds and have massive damage in addition to the other benefits provided by the other mods. The Titan barricades can be an extremely powerful tool for providing both cover and buffs to you and your allies, but using the barricade incorrectly can have some extremely negative consequences. For example, putting it up when you're already low on health and then just dying during the animation is really not ideal, but perhaps the worst possible situation is putting up the barricade and then blocking one of your teammates, as you can see right here. You should simply never put up a towering barricade when surrounded by other players, especially if you're all trying to deal DPS to a boss or a large enemy that's nearby. Whenever I play the survival game mode in PvP, someone always seems to make the following mistake in basically every single match. When the timer counts down and reaches 0, the team with the most lives will win by default, but it seems that many players forget to check how many lives are actually remaining. Many players make the mistake of pushing in when they have the life advantage or simply sitting back passively when they are down on lives. Especially in the latter situation when you're behind on lives, it's absolutely essential to push in aggressively or else you're basically just forfeiting the match and taking an automatic loss. Although it does take just a tiny bit of planning, I've seen that many players do not optimize their bounty and pathfinder stuff by doing them at the same time. So you may want to double check what objectives you have in order to make sure that you're multitasking whenever possible. For example, it's basically a free bonus if you can stack your 801 bounties with your gunsmith bounties and then also throw in some pathfinder objectives at the same time to complete everything without any additional effort. Like you might have a hand cannon bounty and also an arc bounty, and then you can simply use an arc hand cannon to progress both of them simultaneously. You could also do something like farming overthrow for the exotic class item, the sword, and the red borders all at the same time while also doing your bounties in the pathfinder. So to sum it up, you'll just be a lot more efficient if you multitask your farming work within the game. We all use artifact mods, which are great for taking out champions, but you'd be making a mistake by exclusively relying strictly on weapons for all of your stunning. Making use of really easy anti-champion abilities in addition to the weapons will give your loadout much more flexibility, so I highly recommend building into this. For example, the Ember of Torches fragment gives you anti-barrier capabilities because of your melee making you radiant. Harmonic mods are just extremely discounted and cheap versions of regular mods, but sometimes I still see people making the mistake of not actually using these. The harmonic mods do exactly the same thing as regular mods, except their elemental type depends on the element of your super ability. Other than that though, they function exactly the same and they are simply cheaper to use, so be sure to take advantage of these discounts whenever possible. Power leveling is one of those things that's extremely easy and fast if you know what you're doing, but rather painful and slow if you don't. And the following mistake is something that will drastically slow down your progress. Basically, if you're going along with your leveling process and doing your powerful and pinnacle rewards, and then you notice that one of your items is significantly lower than the rest, it is definitely a mistake to continue spamming your powerful reward sources. Instead, what you should try to do is claim a non-powerful reward to increase the power level of that slot, and once you do that, it can often increase your total power level by another point. This, of course, will have the effect of making your next powerful drop be one power level higher than it would have been, and therefore, over time, this kind of snowballs and notably increases the speed that you gain power. When players are new to Destiny, I often see that their loadouts are not the best, and that is totally fine and to be expected. However, I would say that it is a mistake to not spend like 2 minutes setting up an extremely basic build for your Guardian, regardless of how experienced you are within the game. Even if you literally started yesterday, a player who has a basic build will be 5 times stronger than someone who has no build whatsoever. I'm always astonished by how many people are loading into endgame activities with zero synergy in their loadout. So please, even if you're new, just take a few minutes to read your subclass and your exotics and come up with a basic build, because it will help you out more than you can imagine. There are several different mechanics and abilities that cause you to go flying backward in Destiny 2. If you get stomped by a boss, or shiver striked in PvP, or just pushed back by literally anything, you can simply forward melee in order to remove the knockback. Many players don't think to do this, and it often leads to them flying away and potentially falling off the map. So just remember to immediately follow up with a melee, and you won't have to worry about this ever again. Holster mods are great for keeping your weapons reloaded at all times, but if you're not using these, be sure to reload your weapons following a damage phase on a boss. I've seen a lot of players who simply use all their heavy, forget to reload, and then by the time the next damage phase rolls around, they waste valuable time by reloading, and thus massively decrease their overall damage. If you're ever using a third party looking for group service, don't just post your join code while in orbit. This will usually lead to like 12 people joining you all at once, and then you will be forced to kick out all of the extra players. So instead of doing this, a helpful tip is to load into a location that limits the number of people in your fire team to prevent too many people from flooding in. Some good places to do this are the Enclave, which is capped at 3, or the Helm, which is capped at 6. There are a lot of mistakes to be made when it comes to reloading, and we'll be covering some more of those later, but to start off on the subject, I see the vast majority of players not pairing their reload animation with any sort of ability or extra action. As soon as you look down at your HUD and see the number in your magazine increase, this means that you have officially reloaded and you can now do basically anything even while the visual animation is still being completed. You cannot actually fire until the animation is done, but what you can do is throw a grenade, cast a melee, swap to a different weapon, sprint, or do basically anything else you want within your loadout. Of course, this mostly matters if you're trying to optimize your damage on a boss, so just try to get in the habit of doing something as soon as the number in your magazine shows that it has been reloaded. Earlier, we mentioned how fragments and subclasses can have some useful anti-champion capabilities, but also certain perk combinations can have a similar effect. Like, for example, a chill clip fusion will counter both unstop and overload champions, making it so that you don't need to worry about these champions within the rest of your loadout, and thus giving you a lot more flexibility. When using the prismatic subclasses, you normally want to go for a balance of light and darkness elements, because this will help you charge up your transcendence. Therefore, be sure to avoid loadouts that are extremely lopsided one way or the other, because then you'll find yourself with like your dark meter fully charged, but basically zero progress on your light meter. If you're not at max level and you notice that a prime engram has dropped, it will usually be a nice power upgrade for you. However, since the level of the engram does not change after it drops, you're definitely doing it wrong if you wait for any extended period of time before going to turn it in. You're essentially just missing out on free power levels if you continue leveling when prime engrams are in your inventory, so just try to turn them in as soon as you possibly can. I frequently see videos of people with old stuff in their inventory that has been deprecated and therefore no longer serves a purpose. If you are consciously deciding to hold on to certain items, that is totally cool, and I do that myself, but I feel like a lot of players simply do not know that a lot of the stuff in their inventory is no longer useful and is just taking up valuable space. For example, your mementos do not need to be stored in your inventory anymore. Simply dismantle them and they will be credited and show up in your appearance screen like this. Something that is overlooked by a lot of players is the simple optimization of putting on the correct ghost mod for whatever you're doing. For example, the Wombo Detector mod will help you find chests and materials, and just look how easy it becomes for me to find all of this loot in the background gameplay. The pale heart chests are extremely valuable and can even drop the coveted class item exotics, so this detector mod can be insanely helpful. We previously discussed the XP mods, but there is also the economic slot and also the activity slot that have some incredible offerings. For example, Public Defender will give you more loot from public events, and the Ultimate Glimmer Booster will give you 65% more total glimmer to make you super rich. In the activity slot, there are these mods that will give you cores, prisms, upgrade modules, and even additional legendary gear from ritual activities. So definitely make sure to equip one of these next time you head into something like Crucible, Strikes, or Onslaught. Whenever an episode draws to a close, there's a lot of stuff that simply disappears and will never return if you don't claim it. For example, the Ritual Vendor Rewards and Banshee Reputation are a few things that go away every 4 months. I sometimes hear of players who are attracted by the stat bonuses provided by fragments, and they allow these stats to have a significant impact on which fragments they ultimately select. Although the stat bonuses are nice, it's far more important to prioritize the fragment synergy with your overall build. So please don't make the mistake of having tunnel vision and only caring about the stat modifiers. Various mods are color-coded within the menu, and here's a build crafting tip for you. It is often a bad idea to use the blue and yellow mods at the same time. This is because the blue mods will give you bonuses while your armor charge is active, but then the yellow ones will consume your armor charge and make them disappear, meaning that the blue ones will no longer be providing any benefit. The blue mods will also make your armor charge decay over time, so using these two mod colors at the same time tends to be the opposite of synergistic. I know that not everybody here is a raider, but for those of you who are, you might be making the mistake of just unleashing all of your damage right away in the planets encounter in Root of Nightmares. What you actually want to do is use your primary or special to get him down to about this line right here, and then that is when you want to unleash all of your burst damage to get the most optimal damage phase. Certain activities will send in ammo crates that refill both heavy and special ammo to maximum capacity, but in order to make sure you're taking full advantage of this, be sure to spend all of your heavy before picking it up. Sometimes I see players who just instantly loot the box as soon as it spawns in, but they already have like 5 rockets, so the majority of the ammo is simply wasted. The boxes usually stick around for a while, so it's often best to just spend your ammo before picking them up. When you're working on a quest, it tends to take a while to read where the objective is located, and then open up your map, and then select the planet, and then figure out which landing zone it is, and finally hit the launch button. It's a lot more convenient to simply inspect your quest and launch it directly from there to remove all of the steps I just mentioned in the previous sentence. In certain activities, it can be a good idea to use your super before you hit the rally flag, effectively allowing you to cast your super twice back to back. As long as you're careful to not accidentally start the activity, this can be extremely advantageous if you're using something like Well of Radiance, even if it's just for the orbs, and pre-tethering a location where the ads are going to spawn is also extremely powerful. When you're playing with random people who you've never met before, it's usually best to not refer to yourself in first person because they will have no idea who you are. If you do a call out like, "I have the buff," this actually means nothing to them because they probably don't recognize your voice and therefore don't know which player actually has the buff. Therefore, simply referring to yourself with your own name tends to be much more effective. The next thing you might be doing wrong is not shooting the Void Tornadoes that are created by Tormentors. The Void Tornadoes unleash all these crazy waves that deal a ton of damage, but you can completely counter them by just shooting them and making them fly away to stop bothering you. Don't you hate those annoying Vex who put up their immunity shields to regenerate all their health? Well, it turns out there's a way to completely prevent them from ever doing this. If you hit their heads, they will lose their ability to put up a shield or heal. Instead of holding down the button to open the director, it's faster to just tap the inventory and then director button. This will open up your map or director instantly and save you a bit of extra time. If you find yourself dying a lot to ships like Threshers or dropships, chances are you're doing something wrong. You can easily counter most ships by shooting their missiles out of the air, and you can also completely destroy the weapons on both Cabal and Fallen dropships by simply doing enough damage to them. I've seen a lot of people make mistakes when leveling crafted weapons and completing catalyst objectives. What you should be doing is playing on a hunter with the Shadowshot Deadfall super. Then simply hit one enemy with your weapon, and you will cause all of the tethered enemies to die. And the best part is, every single enemy that dies will give you progress on your weapon. Even if you're not a hunter main, it's definitely worth swapping to your hunter for this strategy. Also, if you have access to it, Shuro-chi in the Last Wish raid is still the most efficient way to farm. If you want a checkpoint, just join our Discord because we have access to bots that are constantly holding important checkpoints, including Shuro-chi. If you're still going into your collections and individually marking stuff as seen, you're kind of doing it wrong. You can simply mark everything as seen all at once from the main collections menu. I can't believe I have to say this next one, but bank your motes in Gambit. The amount of people I see to this day who try to save up to 15 motes and then die is astounding. Please, just bank your motes, and I promise this will make your teammates love you. I see a lot of people opening up their menu, going over here, scrolling down, just to change their character or to close the game. However, it's a lot faster to just press whatever button is listed in the bottom right-hand corner of your orbit screen so that you can access this mini menu, which can do all of the same things. Something that YouTube viewers often do wrong is blindly following the loadout and weapon suggestions from content creators. At the end of the day, if you like using a certain weapon, you should just use it and nothing else matters. If it's fun for you, it does not matter if some YouTuber said that it sucks. Destiny has gone through a lot of weapon system changes over the years, so this next one is understandable, but I still see a lot of people misnaming the different weapon slots on their characters. This one is the power slot, aka the heavy slot, this is the energy slot, and this is the kinetic slot. I know we have strand and stasis weapons here now, but Bungie still calls it the kinetic slot, so I guess I'm just gonna go with that. This next mistake is very common, and it brings me an immense amount of pain every time I see someone doing this. For whatever reason, some players are extremely reluctant to use their heavy ammo and their supers. When you consider stuff like heavy ammo scouts and finders and even Aeons, you can have nearly infinite heavy ammo even in hard content like Grandmaster Nightfalls. So just use your heavy ammo. You should never be bringing your heavy or your supers back to orbit at the end of an activity. And also when it comes to supers, you are actually hurting your team if you don't cast your super to make orbs. If everyone on a team uses their supers regularly, everyone will get more orbs, and then everyone will be able to chain supers more often. My friend Misum at TDT has a video series that I've been featured on several times now where we review people's spicy clips. The most common critique that we've had in literally every episode is that people are always making the mistake of bunching up in PvP. There are so many different AoE abilities and supers in this game that bunching up with your team is never a good idea. But don't get me wrong, you want to play relatively near your teammates so that you can set up crossfires with them. You just don't want to be completely on top of them because then you'll both die to something like a Cloud Strike. Especially when it comes to angry people on social media, I see way too many players treating this game like it's a job, and that's definitely the wrong way to go about it. Destiny is meant to be fun, so if you're not having fun doing something in the game, just go play another activity or take a break for a few hours. This next one applies more to endgame PvE, but it might be a mistake to not take the time to learn boss health gates and what triggers the extra adds to spawn. For example, on certain bosses, they will spawn groups of enemies once they reach a certain percentage of their health, so you'll want to know this so that you don't accidentally burn them down too fast and then cause a million adds to spawn all at once and overwhelm you. This next one is really only for newer players, but if you're not using an exotic armor piece at all times, what are you doing? There is literally no reason you should ever not use an exotic. I've seen a lot of chatter about Artifice armor lately, and I think people put a bit too much importance on it. The only special thing about Artifice armor is that it gives +3 to a single stat, but honestly that doesn't matter unless the armor piece is also an incredible roll. Like a regular 68 stat armor is still going to be better than a 62 stat Artifice armor. I know this can be a tough habit to break, but you're doing it wrong if you don't properly manage your postmaster. If it's just constantly overflowing, you'll be missing out on millions of glimmer over time, and you'll probably lose some great weapon rolls that you didn't even know were there. So just clean out your postmaster every now and then, I promise it's worth your time. If you're someone who is actively making this next mistake, fixing it will completely transform what you're able to accomplish in all first-person shooters. If you run around with your crosshair aimed at the sky or the ground, or frankly anywhere that isn't on an enemy, you're definitely doing it wrong. You want to keep your crosshair where you think an enemy will soon appear, so that way you can react about 1,000,000 times faster when they actually show up. This next one is practically a meme at this point, but not learning about heroic public events is a pretty big mistake. Believe it or not, 0 heroic public events are random, and they all have unique triggers that you should probably learn. A really common error in all games, not just Destiny, is blaming the game for your own mistakes. Like 95% of the time you die, it's probably your own fault, and if you consistently blame the game, you're just going to be stunting your own growth and improvement as a player. Don't get me wrong, there are some times like this example where it's not your fault and the game is just screwing you over, but most of the time, just take responsibility so that you can improve. Another weapon leveling mistake that a lot of people tend to make is forgetting that activity completions actually reward a lot of progress. Like, I know this can be a hassle, but you can save yourself a lot of time if you just swap over to your crafted weapons at the end of every activity, because the progress will add up really fast over time. That way, you can spend more time gaming and less time farming. This one has practically become an inside joke with the community at this point, but many players make the mistake of not passing the ball to a teammate in the corrupted strike. Passing the ball makes it much more powerful, so you should definitely do this. There's this really handy way of learning all this information about your gear that I don't see most people using. Instead of inspecting an item and manually going over to all of its perks, you can instead reveal all of this awesome information all in one place by just holding down the left trigger on console or E on PC. I promise this is not your English class, but I always see people spelling a few Destiny words incorrectly, like roll instead of roll, peak instead of peak, and Nezarec instead of Nezarec. In almost every game that I play, I constantly see players on my team making tons of unnecessary noise in PvP. Like, if you're just jumping, shooting, and using your abilities for no reason, you're just telegraphing your position to the entire enemy team and asking for them to come gang up on you. This next one might be a little bit depressing, but honestly, I think it is a mistake to expect Destiny PvP to be balanced. In the long history of this game's PvP, it has never been truly 100% balanced. Once you accept that Crucible is a wild space magic simulator where winning doesn't really matter, it becomes a whole lot more fun. And that's another mistake that people make. People take 6v6 modes way too seriously. It's a casual playlist, so just play for fun and nothing else really matters. When the opposing team summons a Primeval in Gambit, the game opens up an invasion portal. However, if you invade right away, you're absolutely doing it wrong. Instead of rushing in there the second that it opens, wait for a bit until your opponents have done some damage to their Primeval. That way, when you do invade and take out some players, it will heal the Primeval and set their team back in a meaningful way. The next thing you might be doing wrong is looking up your PvP opponents before you play them. Please don't do this, it will really just lead to you being intimidated by their stats, and then you'll start playing scared, which will negatively impact your performance. Just approach each game with confidence, and if you lose, that's totally fine. Destiny has a setting called Full Auto, and I can't really think of a reason why you wouldn't want to turn this on. You can just hold down the trigger forever, and it works with every single weapon in the game. And while you're there, you might also want to turn on Full Auto Melee, especially if you use something like a glaive. Speaking of glaives, you're making a mistake if you're not holding down the shield button while attacking. Believe it or not, it will actually make you swing your glaive much faster than normal, and this is a huge advantage. Instead of opening up your inventory to check the progress on your exotic catalysts, simply pull out your ghost and you can track it from there. To set this up, go to your Triumph section and then select whatever objective you are working on. Something a lot of people do wrong in every FPS game is focusing too much on their crosshair instead of on the target. According to widely accepted aiming theory for gaming, it's better to fixate on the target. Sometimes people go around searching for a scannable item and they really struggle to find it. However, the ultimate solution here is to just pull out your ghost, because he will look in the direction of the scannable and guide you straight to it. For whatever reason, players love to swap their weapons over and over and spam the swap button like this. However, doing this is actually a huge mistake with potentially devastating consequences. We actually tested this in one of my Mythbuster videos, and it turns out that swapping your weapons like this can temporarily jam them and make them refuse to shoot, which can easily lead to your death, especially in PvP. If you're still walking around to pick up bounties from all the vendors, there's a way to do it much more efficiently. In the Destiny app, just tap on bounties and then you can pick them all up without ever leaving orbit. For some reason, a lot of players, myself included, naturally want to hold the forward button while driving a Sparrow. Unfortunately though, this does absolutely nothing, so you might as well break this useless habit. I see a lot of people out there who don't pay attention to game sounds, or they just don't hear them because they have their music or dialogue set way too high. Contrary to popular belief, there are some really important sound cues in this game, especially when you're playing in the Crucible. From invisibility to super activation to even super deactivation sounds, there are some essential sound effects that top players will always pay attention to, and you probably should too. Do not use stasis on suspended enemies. I wish this wasn't true, but unfortunately freezing an enemy will unsuspend them. So if you have a teammate using Strand, you might want to consider not using stasis. If your fire team is using more than one Wither Horde, you guys are doing it wrong. The damage over time does not stack more than once, so you're basically missing out on a ton of damage if you have multiple players using it. The maximum damage Wither Horde can do is one direct impact and one pool beneath the enemy. A lot of newer Destiny players are really resistant to using third-party apps, and in my book, this is a pretty big mistake. Stuff like Destiny Item Manager and D2 Armor Picker are amazing tools that are really easy to use and will simply make your Destiny experience better. Like for example, this website can analyze all of your armor and tell you the most optimal stat build in just a few seconds. Speaking of stats, I see a lot of people making extremely bad choices when it comes to their stat distributions and layouts. Their stats look like this, and they are wasting a ton of extra stat points. Like, you really don't want your stat numbers to be ending with 9 or 8 or something, because anything less than a multiple of 10 doesn't help you. Also, running low resilience in PvE is almost always a mistake. Since the damage resist is just so incredibly valuable, every build on every character should utilize high resilience in PvE. ADS modifier is a setting that changes the speed of your aiming, but if you have this set above 1.0, you're definitely doing it wrong. This should always be set below 1 because this allows you to move around rapidly and still have precise aim. Did you know that you can invite people using this special invite menu? It's a lot faster than inviting someone the traditional way. You can access it from orbit with whatever button the game tells you in the bottom right-hand corner. This next one is a classic mistake that I see a lot of players making, and no joke, if you're someone who still makes this mistake and you fix it, you will die way less frequently. Especially in endgame content, you really need to deliberately play cover and not get caught out in the open. I see so many people like this guy just flying in like they don't have a care in the world, and it leads to them dying every single time. If you're struggling with this, try implementing the 40-60 rule, where 40% of your screen is always in cover. If you do this, I guarantee you'll die like 10 times less often. Two other settings that I regularly see people getting wrong are sensitivity and field of view. Sensitivity is a very personal setting, but players often make the mistake of thinking that higher is better, or they just copy someone else's sensitivity and hope for the best. In reality, there are advantages and disadvantages to both high and low sensitivities, so you should really experiment yourself and find out what you prefer and what fits best with the way that you like to play the game. The same goes for field of view. Higher is not necessarily better. If you're looking for a full breakdown, I made another video about field of view, and I'll link it in the description. Especially in 6v6 Crucible modes like Control, a big mistake I see in almost every game is flipping the spawns. This means pushing so far into the enemy territory that they start to spawn in your territory. In addition to screwing over any of your teammates who happened to have just spawned over there, you're really messing up your team's control of the map. In almost every situation, it's better to just control the center of the map and try to trap the enemy in one spawn at a time. When it's clear that your team is dying in a raid, please don't be the guy who just runs around and tries to survive for as long as possible. Your team will really appreciate it if you just wipe and get it over with instead of wasting everybody's time. This next one might be a little controversial, but I think there is some truth to it. You don't really need that perfect 5 out of 5 weapon for PvE content. Like, sure, it's nice to have a perfect roll, but especially when it comes to stats and barrels, the vast majority of Destiny players will not be able to tell the difference, and it's really not worth the grind. However, getting that perfect 5 out of 5 roll is much more important when it comes to competitive PvE content like a World's First race or any type of PvP. A huge mistake I often see people making is using certain mods that actually do nothing. Like for example, in Crucible, the following mods do absolutely nothing, and you should definitely not use them. Something that almost everybody does wrong is communication in voice chats. They complain about dying to something unfair, they clog up the comms with unnecessary random noise, and they make meaningless PvP callouts like he's over there and he's one shot when he's actually like 80% full health. A mistake that I made for the first few years of my Destiny career was actually jumping incorrectly. You see, if you hold down the jump button as you jump, it actually makes it so that you jump faster and further. I never used to know this, and I always wondered how people moved so fast, so if you didn't know this, your movement will now be much improved. If you're not equipping Iron Banner related things while playing in the Iron Banner, you're definitely doing it wrong. You get a huge reputation bonus by simply equipping 5 Iron Banner things and an emblem, and instead of equipping Iron Banner gear, you can actually just transmog your favorite armor. You can also double dip here by using Iron Banner armor and an Iron Banner ornament on the same piece, and the game will count it twice. Another easy way to reach 5 out of 5 Iron Banner pieces is to equip a heavy weapon, since you won't be using it too much anyway. This is a pretty common one. A lot of players put the dexterity mod on the wrong weapon. In order to maximize the speed at which you draw and stow your weapons, you always want to put the dexterity mod on whichever weapon has the slowest handling. So for example, if you want to draw your energy shotgun faster, but your kinetic primary has low handling, you'd actually want to use a kinetic dexterity mod. I don't know why people do this, but please do not try to fight a bubble or a well in PvP unless you have a really good plan on how you're going to take them down. It sounds kind of weird, but like 9 times out of 10, the best play when you see a bubble is to just turn around and walk in the opposite direction. A lot of people are actually using the wrong ghost mod for armor focusing. This one is a little confusing, but once you understand this, you will start getting much better stats on your armor. So for example, say you want to go for high mobility and high resilience in your build. If this is the case, you actually don't want to focus either of those stats on your ghost mod. Destiny stats are broken up into 2 groups like this, and since you want 2 of the stats that are in the top group, you actually want to focus one of the stats in the bottom group. This will make it so that you have the highest possible chance of getting an armor piece with both high mobility and high resilience, and you'll have the added benefit of being able to select the stat you want in the bottom group. If you're ever unsure whether an enemy is low enough to use a finisher, don't risk your life by running up to them and trying to press your finisher button. Instead, look for a little circle by their nameplate. If the circle is there, that means that they can be finished. The next thing you might be doing wrong is shooting your auto rifle while standing up. All auto rifles are actually considerably more stable when crouched, so unless you have a reason to be standing up, try crouching and you will hit way more shots. A really common mistake is not picking up orbs of power fast enough. These will actually despawn after just about 60 seconds, so make sure you go around and collect them before they disappear. Most people take this route on the Mars Battleground or Nightfall, but technically there is a much better way to do this. You can actually skip this whole section and save yourself a bit of time by just climbing up here and then jumping on these pipes to reach the next level. If you're tired of getting blasted by ships or shriekers, a great solution is to just disorient them with a grenade or grenade launcher. This will completely disable them and just cause them to sit there and do nothing. Within the Vault of Glass raid, many people make the mistake of eliminating all of the random Vex when fighting against Atheon. The problem here is that eliminating all of the flying harpies will actually just cause more of them to spawn. So normally the best strategy is to just leave 1 harpy alive on each side of the room, so then no more will spawn in. Adept weapons are pretty cool to have, but it's definitely a mistake to use some of the Adept mods like this one. Adept Counterbalance is complete garbage because it reduces your weapon's range in exchange for just granting a bit of extra recoil direction, which is literally never worth it. A mistake that most people make in Crucible is standing too close to walls like this instead of being a little further back like that. If you're too close to a wall, it will actually let your opponent see you before you even come out of cover, and obviously this will often make you lose the engagement. I never thought I'd be able to say this, but it's actually no longer a good idea to level up your weapons at Shirochi. You can now just buy levels really inexpensively for a few enhancement cores and easily level up your weapons. However, if you happen to be low on cores, you're either a brand new player or you're probably doing something else wrong. The gunsmith bounties will give you cores every day, so you should always be stocking up on these. You can also dismantle this material called Finest Matter Weave because each of them will give you an enhancement core. And finally, 1 prism can also be converted into 3 cores. If you would like to do this, simply upgrade a blue item to level 8 and then dismantle it for a net gain of 3 cores. If you're holding down the trigger while riding a heavy pike and firing it full auto, you're definitely doing it wrong. You can shoot it about twice as fast by tapping the trigger rapidly instead. When your whole team goes down and this icon appears, a lot of people make the mistake of just sitting there and doing nothing. What you might not know is that you can still actually respawn during this time, so you should definitely be pressing your respawn button. For example, if the game says that you can respawn in a few seconds at the same time that your teammates wipe, you'll have an epic hero moment where you can respawn and go revive everyone. Celestial Nighthawk is a hunter exotic that combines all of your golden gun shots together into one massive high damage blast, but sometimes people make a huge mistake with this that really decreases its potency. If you equip the Deadshot option of the super instead of the Marksman option, you will deal just a fraction of the damage, completely defeating the purpose of using the exotic in the first place. Every time I see this next one, I'm just baffled, but some people still invade in Gambit while holding moats. If you have literally any amount of moats, please bank them before you go risk your life and invade the enemy side. Eager Edge is a sword perk that makes your sword swing go really far, but some people kind of use it incorrectly. If you simply pull out your sword and swing it, your momentum stops right away. However, if you swap to a different weapon right after swinging your sword, you'll maintain a lot more of your momentum and actually travel a whole lot faster. Speaking of momentum, if you ever find yourself in the air and descending towards a sloped surface, you can gain tons of extra momentum by immediately jumping on the sloped surface. Just look how fast I'm able to go after immediately jumping on the staircase. This technique can also be rather helpful in Crota's End. The Fastball mod makes your grenades go faster and further, but you're definitely doing it wrong if you equip this mod with any of these exotics. These exotics all give you Fastball by default, so equipping the mod will actually provide no extra benefit. When you're invisible, you should be really careful about making a lot of noise. Although enemies will never attack you while you're invisible, making a lot of noise will attract them to your location and they will prepare to ambush you as soon as your invisibility ends. Like for example, this guy doesn't know that I'm here, but as soon as I jump, he immediately runs over to my location. Scorn carry around these little lanterns, and you might be making the mistake of not actually targeting the lanterns once they're on the ground. They will explode and help you take out nearby enemies, and the more damage you deal to the lantern, the more damage the explosion causes. Fireteams often make the mistake of grouping up and just standing on one plate in encounters like this one. Although this might be slightly safer, it's definitely more optimal to divide up and stand on all of the plates simultaneously if you can manage to survive. During the Sparrow section of this strike, the blights can definitely give you some trouble. However, you can actually just delete them by using one of these things from the previous room. The best part is, if you simply take out one blight, all of the others will instantly disappear. A surprising amount of people make the mistake of not strafing, or at least not strafing well enough. In both PvE and Crucible, strafing is almost as important as your aim, and it seems a lot of people don't realize this. I also want to note here that if your strafe is really basic and looks like this, it's better than holding still, but you can definitely do better. Other players and even the AI will have no problem hitting a basic strafe pattern, so definitely work on being more unpredictable so you can really throw them off. By the way, if you often die to sniper enemies, that can be a sign that your strafe game might be a little lacking. If you have a really good strafe pattern like this, you can actually get to the point where enemy snipers will miss their shots 100% of the time. Something that can help with improving your strafe is setting up custom buttons and keybinds. If you're still using the default settings, I would highly recommend changing them, and I know that any experienced player would agree. Even though it sounds basic, there's a decent chance that you might actually be reloading your weapons incorrectly. When you run out of ammo in the mag, your weapon reloads regardless of if you press the reload button or not. But if you don't press the reload button, it will reload much slower. Actually pressing the reload button will make you much more efficient and let you deal way more damage, which is of course particularly important for endgame content like raids. Sliding is a pretty essential part of PvP, and less experienced players tend to not take advantage of it as much as they should. Being low to the ground can make you much more evasive, and sliding in general makes you unpredictable, and these are pretty huge factors in the Crucible. I'm totally in favor of people playing the game how they want, but it is objectively not optimal to use double primary weapons in PvE. These days, there are plenty of different ways to counter champions with exotics and abilities, so you should definitely use at least one special, because they can unleash a whole lot of destruction. A mistake that newer players often make is not preparing for endgame content and then having the Pikachu surprised face when they get destroyed. If you're planning to head into something like Trials or Competitive or a Grandmaster, you should definitely take some time to prepare yourself and your Guardian beforehand. You can watch some more of my videos, do some research about what mods and weapons are best, and construct a somewhat cohesive loadout. When you're rallying to the flag in any activity, you should definitely check with your fire team to make sure that everyone has rallied. Otherwise, you will definitely be hearing the all too common call out of, "Oh no, I forgot to rally," right after you begin the fight. Compulsive reloading is definitely a thing that a lot of people do, and it really wastes a ton of time. I promise you really don't need to reload your LMG after firing off 2 shots at a random drag. When players find themselves in close proximity to an exploding enemy, many make the obviously wrong decision of punching them. However, a vastly superior option is to finish them, because the finisher will actually push them away and save you from the explosion. This hunter aspect creates a little strand clone on the battlefield, and if you destroy it, you will be chased down by about 1 trillion little threadlings. In literally every Crucible match that I play, people are still making the mistake of shooting these clones and unleashing the threadlings on themselves and their teammates. You should definitely resist the urge of blasting these, unless you are properly equipped to deal with them. I don't know how this is still a thing, but people are still making the mistake of buying account recoveries and other services where people play on your account. In case you didn't know, this will literally get your account banned, so I definitely recommend staying clear of these so-called services. The most obvious sign that a player is new to Destiny is when they run in a perfectly straight line towards their enemies. Especially in PvP, this almost never works, and it's just about the most predictable thing you could possibly do. So maybe mix up your approach and try out some jumping, sliding, and other varied movement patterns. If you have your heavy weapon out and want to switch to your energy weapon, you do not have to do it like this. If you simply double tap your swap weapons button, you will swap directly to your energy weapon. The panic super is a classic gut reaction that many people do in an attempt to save themselves in PvP. Most of the time though, a good player will simply shut them down right away and they'll completely burn their super for no reason. So maybe resist the urge to panic super unless you're sure that you can pull it off. On the other hand, panic supering in PvE is often a much better idea. If you think your super can save your life, it's probably worth using, especially if it's in content where revives are really limited. When completing the Nightfall, you're definitely doing it wrong if you don't take out all of the champions. These are essential for getting the most score and loot, and yet it's actually unbelievable how many people just run past them and skip them. Speaking of running past enemies though, this can actually be a great idea for activities where score doesn't matter. In some situations, taking out every enemy does just waste your time and give you no extra benefits. I see a lot of players out there who want to give feedback to Bungie so they can make a better game, but unfortunately I see a lot of people giving their feedback in the wrong way. People often suggest solutions to problems within the game, but according to a lot of game developers I've seen, this type of feedback is not helpful at all. If you want to actually be heard, the right way to give constructive feedback is to describe the problems, not suggest solutions. A mistake that newer players make all the time is using an exotic because it has good stats. The actual perk on the exotic armor is far more important than a couple stat points, so you should always prioritize an exotic that actually enhances your gameplay. If you just deploy your ghost normally like this, you might be interested to learn that there's a much faster way of doing it. If you simply double tap the ghost button right as you deploy him, it will remove the animation. It's often a big mistake to not shoot at things that can be destroyed in PvP, like Axion bolts, grenades that stick on walls, and threadlings. Most people tend to spend like 14 years running away from all of these things, even though it's much faster and easier to just turn around and shoot them with a single shot. Minotaurs can be really annoying because they teleport all over and deal a lot of damage, but you can actually just destroy their head and force them to stop teleporting and instead attempt to melee you. Depending on the situation, this can make them much easier to deal with. Some people out there will exclusively use one build or one weapon or one class, and then predictably get burned out or bored with the game. So if you ever find yourself feeling like there's nothing to do, try mixing it up and learning something new, because this can really help the game feel fresh and exciting again. In basically every activity, it is a mistake to jump too much. Floating through the air like this makes you a pretty easy target for players and combatants alike. If you ever have trouble tracking a teleporting enemy, you should pay a little bit more attention to their animation. They will always reveal what direction they are going, so you can easily reacquire your target and continue dealing damage. One of the most common mistakes in PvP is peeking the same area twice in a row. Doing this makes you extremely predictable and puts you at a big disadvantage, so instead try rotating and taking up a new angle. Better yet, try an unexpected angle like this one. Something that people do wrong all the time is refusing to adapt their loadout to the enemies they are about to face. Something as simple as switching your super to counter your opponent's super can win the entire game for your team. I do not understand this, but people have a strange tendency to leave trials and comp games as soon as they start losing. Like your team loses one round and then they're just like, nope, I've seen enough, goodbye. You can easily make a comeback after losing one round, so it's definitely a mistake to leave matches early like this. A mistake that relatively new players make is not learning what roles are valuable on certain weapons. This can be pretty detrimental because it can lead to you accidentally dismantling the best weapon in the game. So if you're new, I would definitely recommend taking a few minutes to figure out what roles are valuable so that you don't unknowingly delete your best weapon. When you activate a roaming super like a Golden Gun or Dawnblade, you definitely should not do so while you're out in the open and exposed to enemy fire. The animations for roaming supers are really long, so if you activate them out in the open, you're just going to take unnecessary damage and potentially die. You should almost always pop roaming supers while in cover, or at least when you know you're relatively safe. When creating a stat build, it's definitely a mistake to not learn what each stat tier actually does for your character. For example, 2 Discipline is basically the same as 3, but 4 Discipline is way better than 3. If you know stuff like this, it'll help you make smarter decisions about your stat builds, and if you want a breakdown for every single stat, there will be a link in the description. Every week, there is a new selection of awesome things for sale in the Bright Dust sections of the Eververse store. If you don't check these every week, you'll definitely miss out on a whole lot of cool stuff that you could have gotten for $0. Many players will simply just stand there when reviving a fireteam member. In both PvP and PvE though, this makes you an incredibly easy target. If you just move around a little bit or put out some cover fire, this will massively increase your chances of survival. Especially for people who are less experienced with FPS games, it's pretty common to aim incorrectly, or at least too rigidly. Some people will rarely hipfire, and others don't aim down sights as much as they should. Having a good balance of both and learning when to hipfire and when to aim is crucial, especially for PvP. This next one is more of a technical setting, but an absolutely massive mistake that many FPS gamers make is not turning on their monitor to its maximum refresh rate. A high refresh rate instantly makes you way better at any game, so it's absolutely essential to make sure you have the highest refresh rate selected. When you're in a team and someone is using a rocket launcher, please don't make the mistake of walking right in front of them. This will of course cause your teammate to blow themselves up, and this happens far more often than it should. Try to just be mindful of everyone's position, including your own. Certain weapon ornaments will actually make your weapons perform better, and you're definitely doing it wrong if you don't take advantage of them. Like for example, this Vigilance Wing ornament makes the sights much more open, allowing you to have a much better view of your target. This next one is really problematic, and it seems to be very widespread in our community. Tons of people are using really suboptimal settings in Destiny 2, and some of these settings can seriously hurt your gameplay. So if you want to learn which settings you should turn off, watch this video on your screen now. And there you go. Now that you know all these things, you'll be able to play more efficiently and make less mistakes in Destiny. Subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.